Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to The Treaded Path, the podcast from Kufi Productions, where we explore the inspiring journeys of Muslim professionals across diverse industries. I'm your host, Salman Hasan, and each week we sit down with remarkable individuals who are making their mark in their respective journeys, respective fields. We highlight their successes, their challenges, and their journey, as well as examining corporate accountability within the industry and offer any actionable advice on career advancement and ethical navigation to those who want to tread that path. As a reminder to our listeners, you can find the show notes, resources, and ways to connect with our guests in the Tread Path archive, which is in kufiproductions.com. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Taskeen Hamidullah Bahl, who has been retired from the workforce officially since 2024, but still putting a lot of her time and effort and volunteering for nonprofits such as Stop the Traffic and Hearts and Homes for Refugees. She's also a board member of Nushoor Institute. And prior to that, prior to retirement, she's gained quite a bit of experience in Wall Street, such as Barclays, HSBC, JP Morgan Chase, within various functions with such as technology, operations, and data. And prior to that, she's worked in the world of news and media, working for CNN and Global Television Network as a reporter and co-anchor. So with that, Sister Taskeen, assalamu alaikum, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Walaikum salam. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to do this.
It's been long overdue, so I'm glad you were here now. But before we dive into your story, I was told you're a global nomad, or at least you recognize yourself as a global nomad. So tell us, what has been your favorite travel destination and why?
Okay. Well, global nomad is actually it's what my friends call me because I have lived kind of all over the world, Asia, Africa, Europe, and then North America now. I guess my favorite destination is not a place I've lived, but a place I've visited a couple of times, which is Malaysia. I love the country. It is especially Kuala Lumpur, I think, for a big city. It is super diverse. Like they have, as you know, it's a Muslim majority country, so being a Muslim woman, a hijabi, everything is very easy. But what I love about them is they've preserved their culture. They've preserved all their cultures. They are accepting of, Hindus, Christians. I don't know if there are any Jews there, but they really hold on to their heritage. They really meld people very nicely. If you look at their architecture, it's like a blend of different things. So for me, it's lovely because it's both a Muslim country where I can feel very comfortable and be myself, but I can also appreciate other cultures. So I would say that would have to be my favorite.
That's a great answer. I've been blessed to visit there once with my family. I was young, but I really want to go back again to experience as an adult, right? It's totally different
Yeah.
experiences when you go as a child versus as an adult, for sure. But no, that's a great answer. I love Kuala Lumpur and Malaysia, and you're right. They really do a great job of being hospitable, but also maintaining their true identity as Malaysians, right? So no, so that's great. So jumping into your story now, can you give our listeners a brief overview of what you do currently?
So, as you mentioned in your intro, I've been retired for about 2 years. And I'm 52 and I kind of wanted to spend this last part of my life, let's say another 20, 25 years while I'm still in good health, inshallah, doing
Inshallah.
the things I'm passionate about. Before I started my career on Wall Street, as you mentioned, I worked in the media and I worked in nonprofit. And I always knew when I worked on Wall Street, even though I loved my job and I loved what I did, and we can talk about that a bit, I always knew I was going to come back at some point in some way, shape, or form. So right now, as you mentioned, I am doing pro bono work most of the time, all of the time, actually. I'm not doing any paid work across a couple of different organizations, but they're focused around sort of, I would say, two big themes. One is around anti human trafficking and forced labor, which through my work at the banks, I got very involved in. And then, of course, around this whole idea of human rights, whether that's refugee resettlement, whether that's helping people in conflict zones, which you are part of Nushoor with me, so we try to do it through there, but sort of centered around those two themes.
A very very great initiatives of both on both angles, and obviously we need more people like yourself who have a passion for uplifting other human beings, right? And also advocating for their human rights, right? It's a sad reality to think that there are parts of the world where people think that some humans are less deserving of universal rights than others, right? So it's a constant struggle in that sense to be able to fight for the rights of others. But I want to ask you now, in the beginning, what initially drew you to journalism, and then how were you able to pivot into Wall Street, which is, as you know, one of the most male dominated and conservative industries that exists today?
It is indeed, and especially sort of higher up, right? The higher up you go, it becomes very sort of one dimensional, unfortunately. So I've always had, I think I've always been interested in, human rights. I've always been interested in development of people, etc. So I think when I first stumbled upon the idea of journalism. I knew I was a good writer. I knew that was something I could leverage. But the reason I wanted to be in that field was I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to tell stories that most people wouldn't hear. I wanted to tell stories about the disenfranchised. I wanted to tell stories about disempowered people, bring those things to light in that theme of, hopefully somebody will hear this story and say, my gosh, that's terrible. I want to do something about it. And so I did that for a while. I worked in newspapers and radio and TV, as you noted. But then over time, I realized it wasn't enough for me to just be telling the stories and hoping somebody else would hear a story and do something about it. I thought, wait, why am I, if I am passionate about this, if my goal is to help people, why am I actually not the one that is taking the step to help someone, right? Why should I be one step removed? So that
Right.
really made me start thinking about what kind of organizations, I'd want to be a part of. So at that point, I'd already started thinking about, okay, I think I want a career. I want to pivot my career. One of the, as I was covering these stories, I was in Bangladesh and I found out about the Grameen Bank, which many of your listeners will probably know about, microfinance, micro enterprise organization. It was at that time the first of its kind. Now, obviously, there's dozens and dozens all over the world modeled on it. But this idea that you could give micro loans to people who perhaps were illiterate, perhaps were in villages, perhaps did not have access to banking and could not get loans to start their own business, become empowered. I thought that was just a really, really powerful tool. So I left journalism. I found a job in microfinance in the U.S. There's plenty of microfinance jobs organizations here, of course, but it was modeled after the Grameen Bank. It was in North Carolina, and I worked there for a few years. I loved it. People were great, very passionate. And then, but I discovered something about the nonprofit industry. It's folks who have sort of huge hearts. They're very passionate. They want to drive change. They're innovators, but no one's really been trained to run a business, to run a nonprofit like a business. And when you think about, the funding constraints of a nonprofit, that's actually even more the reason why you want to run it like a business. You want it to be
Right.
efficient. You want every penny sort of stretch. So I decided to go back to school and get a graduate degree. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to get my MBA. I got an MBA from the Wharton School in Finance. I got my MA in International Relations, again, keeping with the theme of development from Johns
Sure.
Hopkins. And I thought, I'll just go to Wall Street for a couple of years because those guys kind of know what they're doing. Maybe I'll learn from them. I'll just go there for a couple of years and then I'll come back to nonprofit. So I did. I started a firm called Bear Stearns, which eventually got acquired by JP Morgan Chase. But while I was there, I actually stumbled into work in what's called the financial crime space. So these are folks at all banks, which is required in the US by the Patriot Act, but also in every bank abroad now to do anti money laundering monitoring, to prevent terrorist financing, to make sure that we're not sending money to sanctioned countries, to prevent fraud. So the whole umbrella of financial crimes. And once I went into that space, Brother Salman, I was hooked, right? Like every day you were breaking up rings or you were finding out criminal rings or you were finding out about some criminal activity. And yeah, we partnered with law enforcement. We weren't the ones that actually stopped the crime or rescued the victims. But it was very fulfilling to be part of a world where you could sort of take a little bit, you could take a little bit of that step towards helping society protect, innocent customers, protect broader society. So I really loved it, and that's kind of what I did across JP Morgan Chase, HSBC, and then Barclays was work in this financial crime space area, which was super fulfilling. Learned a lot. I have nothing bad to say about, all organizations have good and bad, but I generally have nothing bad to say about Wall Street. And I learned a lot. I learned a ton. I took a lot of chances. I failed at a lot of things on my way up. But, I had the privilege of managing a lot of great teams, and every day was a challenge. So I think for me, when I stepped away and said, and it was almost like the peak of my career, somebody said, "Oh my God, you're retiring. You're like at the peak of your career. You're like a COO. Why are you leaving now?" But it was really something that my husband said to me, which is, you've always been passionate about the nonprofit space. You now have the skill set to work there, and you're in your 50s. What, you have another 20, 25 good years? Even if you live till 90, you're not energetic, you may have physical problems, health problems, etc. What are you going to do to make this part of your life count? And when he said that, I thought, wow, that's it really hit me, and I thought, this is what I want to do. So that's what brought me to where I am.
That's a wonderful story. So many lessons I'm sure that people can and the audience can draw from that. But I want to hone in on so in the podcast where we love to talk about the intersection of your profession and your faith and
Yep.
how you use the faith to kind of drive some of the decision making within your career, right? And your journey. Were there moments you felt were the key moments you felt like you absolutely needed to call upon Allah and get that guidance, and then from your upbringing and what you learned from our deen helped with the decision making in your career?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Percent. I mean, as I said, right, I I was a very senior executive when I left, but I started as an associate at a business school, right? So I literally
Climbed up the ladder,
climbed
quite
up the
literally.
ladder. It took time. It took 20 years, and it took it took taking chances. The jobs that I agreed to do were jobs that nobody else wanted to do, right? When you think about financial crimes, it's super stressful. If you make one mistake, your bank could be on the front of the Wall Street Journal having worked with money launderers and terrorists and whoever, right? So it was super stressful. And I think in all of those, I started every job, Brother Salman, thinking I'm going to fail. I have no ability to do this job. I have no ability to be successful. And every time I had that feeling, said to myself, Allah gives us only what we can bear. So if I've been put on this path and I have been, given this opportunity, it is because I have to believe that my creator um, has given me what I can bear. So there is a way around this. I think my faith actually deepened over those 20 years because I needed his help. I needed to count on prayer. I needed to count on the belief that I was doing this for a good reason, that this was the path that was meant for me. Inshallah. So yeah, I think definitely, it is something that's always, I think for me, religion has always been in the back of my mind. You and I haven't known each other that long. I'm a recent hijab wearer, so we can talk about that also. But I may not have been overtly
Sure.
identified Muslim
Yeah.
all the time, but it was always there. It was always around me. It was always in my heart. In times of need, that's who you turn to, right? You turn to your deen, you turn to your creator. So for me, it was a very important part of my decision making.
I would say there's nothing greater, a greater solution to, resolving the imposter syndrome than turning back to the one who can solve any issue, the creator, with Allah, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And excuse me one second, clear my throat. So I hear it all the time. Students, working professionals, seasoned veterans, even retirees. Like they all feel like, am I really cut out for this? Like I don't know if I can do this. This is in a job that seems seemingly too impossible for me. But we're always told, whatever obstacle you face, turn back to Allah, for guidance, and then just give it your best shot, right? And really, that the outcome is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Correct. And one thing, Brother Salman, I would just add, right? I'm glad you mentioned imposter syndrome because I think is very present in the industry I worked in, and especially for women, and especially for women of color, and especially for folks who are relatively young for the level that they were at. So I was constantly in boardrooms with lovely people, but they were all older than me. They were like 99% white. They were 100% at most times male. So I always felt a little bit out of place. And one thing I would say is to get over that imposter syndrome. If you have the privilege of really believing, as in you have Iman, you really have a deen, I would say one of the things you say to yourself is, who is actually judging me? It's none of the people in this room. Like, it actually doesn't matter, right? Like, these are just a bunch of other human beings. Yeah, they're senior. Yeah, they're smart, but I would not be here but for the grace of God. And who at the day is judging me? Right? It's none of these people. And I think I kept saying that to myself over and over because I think imposter syndrome is a very real thing. And I don't think you get over it unless you say, like, there's a bigger purpose to all of this.
100%. And I mean, talk about, being out of place, right? You've been shattering stereotypes. Being in rooms where like you're quite literally the polar opposite of majority of the people that are there in the room. But to your point, it's, really reading the room and then understanding who's in control of everything, right? At the end of the day, it's not the CEO, it's not your, stakeholders or, the those who own the stocks or whoever. Our creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ultimately in charge of every single thing and the outcomes thereof. Now I'm glad brought up that point, which takes me to the question I wanted to ask you as far as challenges are concerned. Oftentimes people want to be in a certain room, right? But they perceive certain challenges as to be too great, right? So, what are some methods that you've employed in the past that kind of helped you to um, not only overcome those challenges, but like feel like you're also belonging in that room too, right?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think it's something everyone struggles with. And, people who say they don't struggle with that, they're either like so full of themselves that they don't even care, or they're just probably fibbing a little bit, right? Because everybody feels some level of that. Look, one of the things that happened very early in my career, Brother Salman, and this sort of happened by it wasn't by planning, was, I started off in a small stint in investment banking, and then I got an opportunity to work in corporate strategy and process improvement. And a lot of that type of work was, here is something that's broken, go and fix it. Right. And so things which are broken are traditionally like, they're not fun. They're like maybe a regulator, the bank's done something and the regulator's upset, or, the financial crisis is a great example. Lots of like mortgage fraud, et
Right.
cetera, going on, like trying to go into an area that's messy and try to clean it up. And being the person in the room, by the way, who knows the least about it, because you're going up against subject matter experts that have been doing this for 20, 30 years, it's difficult. But I sort of had the intellectual curiosity to say, I wonder what happened here. Like, let me go and see what happened here. So I think the first couple of us assignments I took in that space was just purely because I was just interested. I was like, how did we get here? Financial crisis. How did this actually happen? But then the more I took those type of assignments, the more I became known for someone um, who became known for going and fixing messy things, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And one of my mentors, who was COO at one of those banks, said to me, a lot of people see a fire and they run away from it. You run towards it. And I don't think it was a very conscious decision, but now when I look back on my career, I see, I've not taken a job in the last 15 years where everything has been steady and easy. It's always been, complicated and messy. And also, it's areas that I know little about, right? So acknowledging on day one that I have to learn from something from scratch before I can be the person who helps fix it. So I think I took those opportunities, but one thing I always told myself is, look, if it was easy to fix, someone would have fixed it already, right? So
Right.
that
Right.
gives, that gives you a little bit of validation, right? If it was that easy to fix, somebody would have fixed it. So nobody's putting up their hand to do this. That in itself is how you earn your place in the room, right? You don't have to be the smartest person. You have to surround yourself, I think, with smart people. You have to ask lots of questions. You have to be afraid. You have to be unafraid of asking questions. Like, I never think, if I ask that question, is someone going to think I'm stupid? Like, if I need to ask the question and if someone explains it and I don't understand it, I'll say, sorry, explain it to me like I'm five. Like, explain it again until I understand it. And I think over time, as you do that, you ask questions and you get to the real root of the problem and you fix it. And that gives you a little bit of credibility. And then you do your next thing and that gives you credibility, right? So even though in the back of my head, even until my last assignment, I was probably like, oh my God, I don't deserve to be here. Oh my God, I don't think I can do this. Everybody in the room said what they would say is, yeah, but you've already fixed this and you've already done that. So you've demonstrated to us that you do belong in the room. So I think it is those sort of taking those stretch assignments, doing uncomfortable things. I've got 3 kids. I tell them all the time, like, don't go for the easy A, right? Take a class that's hard. I would rather you take a class that's hard for you and you get a B plus than you get an easy A and you kind of soar through it. So yeah, take those stretch assignments and try to do things that make you uncomfortable because that's how you, one, you'll know that's how you'll grow, and two, that's how you will know how resilient you are. You are more, the more you do these things, the more resilient you become.
Great advice. I love it. Comfort is the killer of growth, as they say, right? Like when you're comfortable,
Absolutely.
you're not stretching your abilities to shine even more, right? I'm recently trying to do exercising, and in the world of fitness, as you can't your muscles don't get stronger if you don't stretch it, if you don't get it uncomfortable, right? That's
Right.
why they tell you to do a number of
Yeah.
reps, right? You don't have to do like heavy weights, but as long as you consistently do, 10, 15, 20, sit-ups, push-ups, or, weightlifting, whatever it is, the more you do it, the stronger you will become eventually.
Yeah. That's a great analogy. When you exercise and it gets really hard towards the end, it's doctors always tell you like mix it up. You're supposed to feel something. You're supposed to feel a little bit of discomfort. You don't have to kill yourself doing it, but
Right, right, right. Yeah, 100%. So with that in mind, I want to also focus. So I want to talk about accountability, right? Because that's an area where you're supposed to be uncomfortable, be in the spaces where, you know, you, um, you're not necessarily comfortable in or have not been exposed to for some time, for extended amount of time. It's an area where you have to practice, or let me put it this way: when you show accountability in whichever space you're in, that's kind of how you also grow your confidence and ability to show up to different places where you feel like traditionally or previously you felt like you don't fit in, right?
yeah.
So we're taking your experience, for example, in the world of financial crime, right? Accountability is the name of the game, right? Like you have to ensure that you take the right steps to ensure that those uh, the criminals and those in the underworld are not continuing those activities. So I wanted to ask you now, with that, with the focus of accountability, how can we as individuals advocate for more of that so that people are more comfortable with being accountable or holding themselves and others accountable?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think accountability is something that, the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And what I
Reps,
mean by that is,
right?
yeah, reps. In my career, right? Like, I would say when I first started, if I made a mistake, I would say, I made a mistake, but I would qualify it, right? And as I grew more senior and as I became a leader and as I became responsible, managing thousands and thousands of people, like the buck stopped with me, right? So it didn't matter that some system down here broke because some coder made a mistake or some analyst. Like it didn't matter. What mattered was that error didn't get caught because I and my management team didn't put the right controls in place to catch it. Because making mistakes is human, right?
You're
That's
right.
not we will all make mistakes. And by the way, if we're never making mistakes, we are then in our safe zone. We are not taking chances, right? So we don't want that. But we want to be able to very quickly put our hands up and say, I made a mistake, like, stop. This is wrong. I made a mistake, so let's not keep doing this. Two, you need to be able to very quickly show people that there's a way to pivot from that, right? So one of the things I always experienced was, when somebody would like make a mistake, they would just sort of get into this analysis paralysis, right? And it's like, stop, acknowledge the mistake, figure out very quickly how to pick yourself back up and move on, right? And one of the things we did at my last job was, how like in, these town halls, you're always like, I want to call out all these people who did these amazing things. We would start calling out people who also made mistakes, but that mistake allowed us to emerge with something better. Like that mistake showed us that our process had an issue. But you can only do that if the person at the top takes accountability, right? And I think that's
Right.
true whether you're managing, 10,000 people or you're managing one intern or even in your family, right? Like if you make a mistake, admit it very quickly, like get out there and put that out there and then figure out how to pivot from that and then just what I say to my kids, really, really, really try not to make the same mistake twice. Like you need to have learned from the mistake. You're going to make like 20 other mistakes, but it's not going to be that. And I think that becomes really important. In our world today, I mean, you look at the news, you see what's going on in geopolitics. Like it's everybody's figuratively dodging the bullet, right? Nobody's taking
Right.
accountability for something that was a mistake. And it's a little bit like right now you're seeing things in the US where it's like, we made a mistake, but we don't want to say it. So we're just going to keep doing that thing even more. That's like in business, what you would call a sunk cost. Like it was wrong to do it in the first place, but by perpetuating it, you're making it even worse, right? So, yeah, I think accountability starts in your personal life, extends to your professional life, then can extend to your community, et cetera, et cetera. Like I think there are variations, but we need to provide an environment where people don't feel afraid to speak up. People don't feel afraid to say, be accountable for stuff, and where people don't feel afraid to say the unpopular thing. Let's say the unpopular thing. If it's the right thing to do,
Right.
let's say. And some people
Yeah.
will disagree, and that's fine, but we have to create an environment where people feel comfortable enough doing that.
I love how you said, you know, we need to be comfortable admitting that we made the mistake. I think that's also core of like the beginning of how do we become more accountable to ourselves and to others or for others as well. Traditionally, and in my experience, unfortunately, a lot of Muslim or companies that brand themselves as Muslim or catering to Muslims, they historically have not done a good job of admitting
Sure.
mistakes, right? Which is a problem. And then, of course, even after that, right? Like, making sure that like that mistake, is not perpetuated, right? And so, how would you address that, like moving forward, like to promote, well, before we promote accountability as a whole to the general populace, how do we go about first telling people that? And I think maybe you already answered the question, but like, it's okay to admit you made a mistake. It's okay that,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's part of being human, right?
Yeah, I think step one is look, you're a parent of three kids, right? Two or three
You're right.
kids, three.
3 kids. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm a mom of three kids, right? Step one, demonstrate to the next generation that when you make a mistake, it's okay to say it. It's okay to say it out loud, and it's okay to move from that, and figure out how to not make that mistake again, right? So part of it is like just generationally teaching people, and I think, by the way, I don't know if it's Muslim culture, but I'll talk a little bit about Bangladesh, which is where I'm from, which is where you're from. There is a little bit of a culture of like, ooh, if you made a mistake, don't say it because that shows a weakness. And what we've got to show our kids is making mistakes is a strength because it means you took that chance. It means you pushed yourself. It means you tried something difficult. And the chances are, yeah, you might have a failure. You might make a mistake. It's human. It's not an issue. One thing we did at my work, talked about like famous famous mistakes, right? Like you hear about like all these things that were discovered by accident, penicillin, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a story, and I want to say it's Microsoft. I'm not absolutely sure, but like this is like in the early days of like AI. Maybe it was Microsoft or maybe it was Amazon when they were developing Alexa. When they first, were creating like AI, they would ask the AI a question, and the AI would like repeat what it had learned, obviously, because it was a
Right.
learned
Sure.
behavior, and it would curse, right? And so instead of saying, "Oh my god, we have a product that like is going to curse in front of all our customers and it's going to be terrible," they highlighted that, right? They said, "Okay, but this is showing us that our AI is actually learning. It's mimicking human behavior. And yes, that's not the behavior we wanted to mimic, and that part we have to fix, but there's something, it's proven to us that this works, right?" And I can't remember exactly what company that was, but that's kind of like the idea, right? Like your mistakes can be embarrassing, but I think owning it and saying, actually, I learned something from this and moving on from that is really important. So I would say we start as simple as with our kids, right? Like
Yeah.
in the Muslim community. And then again, it's gradations of that. If you can do that in your workplace, if you are a leader, if you manage a lot of people, right? My management team and I, folks who reported to me manage thousands of people, right? They would make it a point. If they made a mistake, they would make it a point. They would write an email that said, literally would start with, I made a mistake. Here's what happened, right? That gives everybody else then more junior the courage to say, okay, so it's not the end of the world, right? And one of my mentors used to say, mistakes don't age well. At JP Morgan, this was a very common saying, right? Mistakes don't age well. So the more you try and hide it, the worse it's going to get. So what they wanted was make a mistake, own it, have accountability, figure out how to fix it, try not to make that mistake again, but create that environment where people feel comfortable having that accountability.
I love that because, as you're saying, in the Bangladeshi culture, that unfortunately that it's instilled very early on in age that, like, don't make a mistake, or otherwise, what will they say about us, right?
Correct. What would someone think?
Well, like, in Bangla, they'll say, and so in translation, that it's exactly what will they say about us, right? And so because that's been instilled from such an early age, the children then carry that on to adulthood. And then as they go on with their careers and launching companies and managing teams and managing full companies, I guess intuition of like, just hiding, your actions, your activities, if you made a mistake, oh, okay, let's cover it up.
Yeah.
At the end, it hurts him even much worse because, as you get older, the consequences of, your bad choices become that much more exponentially greater, right? And so I love the advice of like, building an environment in a way that encourages people to not only speak up, but like, admit that you made a mistake and then you can move on, right? Rather than hiding it. Cause like you said, mistakes don't age well. So I think with that in mind, I want to ask you my follow-up question about like when people want to search for companies that they want to work for that's ethical, right? Because, accountability, ethics, they're quite tied to each other, right? Like hand in hand. What's the process for understanding and doing the research for finding those ethical companies who, when they make a mistake, they don't hide it, right? They admit to it, right? And I mean, I'm sure there's so many methodologies as far as like doing your research as, for which company you want to, work for or, put your time towards as an intern, volunteer, or a full-time employee. However, is there nowadays with so many, with the global economic and socioeconomic politics that's existing today, what would your advice be as far as finding those ethical
Yeah.
institutions and companies right now?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And look, with social media right now, it's actually so much easier if you have the curiosity to actually do the work, do the legwork, and find the answer, right? So when I help people, I still help people prep for interviews and so on. And people always go to the website, right? Like the website is what the company wants you to see. The website is they're gonna have great programs and all of that is
They're
fantastic,
showing
right?
their best face on their
They're showing their
website.
best face. That's their job, right? But now with social media, you can like listen to interviews, you can listen to clips, listen to what their leaders are saying, listen to what their board members are saying, listen to when they're being challenged, whether it's by a journalist, whether it's by an activist investor, right? See how they react to that. Do they shut it down or do they actually engage in that? Even if they
Mm,
disagree, do they actually engage? Because if they're engaging, then they're allowing free speech. If they're shutting it down, that means it's my way or the highway, right? You'll
right.
see, and by the way, you see even, like now in media with the war going on in Iran and lots of other things, you'll see all these YouTube and TikTok influencers that, because they don't get the transparency from the US Congress and Senate, they're basically chasing politicians down the hall asking them questions, right? And some of
Yeah.
those politicians are not afraid to say what they think, even though they know it does not mesh with the viewpoint of the reporter and they're going to get into trouble for it. And then there's other politicians who are like just completely feign ignorance as a way to shut things down, right? That tells you something, right? It tells you like, okay, my beliefs may be different from yours, but if you're not at least willing to engage in that discussion, then that's not a sustainable environment. So when I think about work, it's not a sustainable environment if I can't challenge you as my leader, right? Now, In a great workplace, you can challenge the leader, and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But the most important thing is you can challenge. You can have
Right.
that discussion. So I think there's lots of ways to do it now, honestly, Brother Salman. I would say there's information out there. Like I think you get more information from reading articles and watching videos, etc., than you do from going on the website or just talking to people who work at the firm. Because the people who work at their job is to present the best view of the firm, right? That's the reality. That's what they're getting paid for. But what you really want to look at is what do they do? And like if you're working in the private sector, it's some people may think it's boring, but look through their annual reports. Like see what kind of things they're interested in. Like, do they put their money where their mouth is, right?
Right.
When when DEI was a thing, everybody had a DEI committee, right? Everybody was like, this is really important to us, diversity. And then when you looked at the operating committee, most senior levels, you would see, and this is all public information, right? You would see there was literally not a single person of color, a single woman, etc. So it doesn't matter if you have a great DEI program if it's not reflected in your
Right.
leadership, right?
Yeah.
I think I think critically and ask those questions and use those data points to help you make your decisions.
Great. No, that's great advice as well as far as doing your research and how to do it. Because I can understand from someone's perspective as far as like because of there's a wealth of information out there thanks to internet and social media. It can be overwhelming as to figuring out where to start, where to begin. Um, but I love how you said I watch their interviews. I think it's a great starting point, seeing how they conduct themselves in front of the camera and how they and their response to the questions, right? Whether or not they shut it down or welcome it. And so my follow up question to you is when young professionals are trying to start their careers, what is the biggest mistake you've seen they make, and what's the resolution to that mistake?
He's saying not being flexible. And what I mean by that is thinking, I want this job in this company, in this industry, and it has to be exactly this. And if I don't get all of these things and in this location and, it's just like, it's not worth my time, right? The reality is, you're not going to know until, like, you almost have to take that chance of like doing all that research and saying, this company feels like a good fit for me. But guess what? You're actually not going to know what it's like in that
Right,
company in role until you've done
right,
it for at least a year, right? So I think that's one thing. And then the other thing is, look, I have, there's two things in my career always. One is that we talked about earlier, which is always going for the stretch opportunity. But the other thing that I've always, when I've tried to make a decision about do I want this job or not, do I want to go, is what are the people like? Like, how can I find out as much as I can? Because you actually, especially a young professional, will actually spend more time in this world with their work colleagues than they will anywhere else, right? So
that's true.
I don't want to be around jerks. Like I'm definitely too old for that, and I think I was too old for that when I was in my 20s, right? Like, we have to surround ourselves with people we want to emulate. We don't wanna surround I don't wanna surround myself with people that I'm like, they're a complete jerk. Like, I don't want my majority of my days to be like that. And so for me, you know, even at the senior levels, like, a lot of times I went to work for a person, and I recognized and, what I looked for, by the way, in that person was like all my bosses, last 3 or 4 bosses that I can think of, I knew their bar was gonna be high and I knew I was gonna struggle. Like I was like, "Oh my God, if I don't know if I'll make it through to the other end, but if I do, I'm gonna be so much better because their expectation like they are just going to be they're not jerks, they're not difficult people, but their bar is high and I'm always gonna be just below that bar, like always trying to
Right.
reach. But I thought that was a great way to sort of transform yourself. And, I've stayed in jobs not because of my boss, but because of the people, my management team and the people who work for me, right? Like I've learned so much from every single person that I've interacted with, right? Good or bad, junior or senior, right? So I think a key thing is surround yourself with people who are better and smarter than you. You don't want to be actually the smartest person in the room because that you see, right? And
Right. Right.
I would say for the last 20 years, I'm always in rooms, even with people who are 3 levels below me that are smarter than me. And that's why I hired them, right? They work they're much more junior to me, but I have so much to learn from them because they're better and smarter than me, and I
They
think
see things differently than you do, right?
100%, 100, and you should be proud to say, like I always used to say, my management team is smarter than me. You should be proud to say that. You should be proud to say, I assembled a team where I picked every single person on that team is better than me. Like that, I am proud of that because that means I look for the best talent. And that means I was not afraid to surround myself with people who would challenge me and who would push me to become a better version of myself.
And thereby ensuring long-term success and longevity.
100%. 100%. Especially in leadership jobs. You are not going to be successful because you're amazing. You're going to be successful because the 5,000 people or 200 people or 20 people or 5 people that you're managing are like your team is actually what
It's
lifts you.
risen.
So
Yep.
100%.
Yep. Alhamdulillah. No, that's great. So, as we kind of start wrapping up slowly at our conversation, I want to ask you some, closing reflections, questions, and try to get some advice from you as far as like what should people look forward to, right? And I want to ask you this question because you spend quite a bit of time in the financial district, right? So beyond financial metrics, how would you define success for yourself?
I think so. Financial metrics, how much money I saved, how much money I helped the bank make, how much trouble I kept us out of by making sure we did the right thing and didn't consort with criminals. Those are all professional measures of success. Personal measures of success for me the whole time I was working on Wall Street was, how many people did I give jobs to? How many people did I help elevate? How many people did I that just was having a rough time because perhaps of something personal. Perhaps they were trying to juggle a million things. Perhaps they were sick that I helped, that didn't quit because I helped do something that helped carry them until they could carry themselves, right? Those I think are the measures of what those are the measures I think on a personal level that make it worthwhile, right? Did I leave a mark on the world? Did I help someone? Did I help someone also become a leader that is fearless and takes chances and is unafraid to make mistakes, right? Did I leave behind a group of people, a management team that could do a better job than me? I always say like I started every job by saying my job is to work myself out of this job. And I'll only work myself out of this job if one of my direct reports can step into my role. So that was always my goal. Whether I left or not was irrelevant. It was that somebody had been trained up. So I think to me, those are sort of like the personal metrics. And, like, are people going to look back and say she was a good person. She was a nice person. Like, that's corny, but it's important. Like, to me, it's important that people are
Yeah.
not like,
Yeah.
she was really good at what she did, but she was a complete jerk and she made our lives miserable. Like that is not how I want to be remembered, right? So I think thinking about those things and thinking about, are you personally picking up the skills that then help you? When I worked at a bank in financial crime, I helped the bank. I helped the bank's customers. Now I'm using those skills to help broader parts of society. Like to me, that's a personal accomplishment. The personal accomplishment is not
Hmm.
saving billions of dollars or bringing in
You're right.
billions of revenue.
Mashallah, no, that's really impressive when you're able to take a skill set that you've acquired over the years from like corporate, right, and then apply that to causes that you believe in and nonprofits and etc. I think that's an amazing accomplishment, alhamdulillah. So that's really good.
Jazakallah.
So on that note, I want to ask you now, like I ask every one of my guests, are there specific ways that our audience and people in general can support your causes and the things that you're involved in that you
Yeah,
mentioned?
no, absolutely. I mentioned one of the causes very close to my heart is the anti-human trafficking and forced labor movement. Millions and millions of people around the world right now are being trafficked. They're in forced labor. It used to be called modern slavery. The US has stopped using that term because it gives images of people, the trope of somebody like locked in a room. The reality is today, human trafficking does not look like that, right? It's somebody at a university that is being forced to work without pay, is being forced into sex crime, into forced sexual behavior, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? It is all around us. So I think step
Yeah.
one, like educate, if our listeners can help educate themselves. And, sadly, everything that's happened with Jeffrey Epstein has brought this to the forefront. But the reality is, sex trafficking, labor trafficking, all of this stuff. And for minors too, it was always happening. And it's happening in our backyard. Right? The trope used to be it's happening, but it's happening somewhere very far away in some country. Guess what? It happens in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, all over the US, all over Canada. So I think education is really, really important because you don't have to be a law enforcement official to do something, right? You just have to be able to observe. And, we have, as you know, the World Cup. Um, we're hosting the World Cup in the US in a couple of months and organized sporting events. When those happen, we've noticed Super Bowl, et cetera. That's when you see an uptick in trafficking. So I think that's, let's all educate ourselves so we can figure out if we see signs of someone being trafficked, what can you do about it? And then same thing with like, more broader human rights, right? Refugee resettlement, helping people in conflict zones, right? The reality is, if you are in this country, and it's not true for everybody, but a vast majority of us are like ridiculously privileged, right? And I don't mean just that we have money, because a lot of people in this country don't have money, but we have freedom of speech, we have a roof over our heads, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those of us that have those things, I think it is our duty, and especially for Muslims, to give back. Like that is like Allah has given us this blessing and given us this life, and it's our job to give back to the community. So I would say, whether it's helping our Muslim brothers and sisters in war-torn zones, through organizations like Nushoor, through, many, many other organizations that we all work with, or just, the broader community, right? I think those are the things that will count, right? Like in the akhirah, that's what will
Absolutely.
count. Your
Absolutely.
money, your house, your degree, none of this will count, right? We think about, sadaqah jariyah, right? The things that live on, the good deeds that live on after you have died. Those are the kinds of things. So I think there's never too little. I used to think, well, I'm working, so I don't have time. But about 10 years ago, I thought, even if I can do 1 hour a week, and maybe in 6 months, it'll become 2 hours a week, or maybe it'll become something isolated. That's okay, right? You don't have to quit your job and do
Right.
this for the rest of your life, but in some way. And, one last thing I would say in Islam, we really, really believe in this, right? Like charity begins at home. Take care of your family, take care of your neighbors, take care of your community. You don't have to start off by helping somebody 3 continents away, right? Observe what's happening around you. There's plenty of people in the US that need our help. So
Absolutely.
do your job as Muslims. That's what Allah has asked us to do. That's what the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has told us
Salawat.
over and over again.
Alhamdulillah, that's great. And I think this is a great spot to kind of conclude, right? But I want to thank you, Sister Taskeen, for your time today and for sharing your journey with us today. Your professional and personal journey is very insightful, and I'm sure people will resonate with a lot of what you've said today. So Jazakallah khair to you and to our listeners, inshallah. Thanks for listening, and inshallah we'll see you again next week, inshallah. Take
Thank
care.
you for the opportunity. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for listening to the Tread Path podcast. You can find all the resources our guests mentioned in the Tread Path archive in our website, kufiproductions.com, along with the links to connect with our guest speakers. If today's conversation inspired you or helped you in your own professional journey, we'd love to hear from you. So please leave us a review, share the episode with someone who might benefit, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. May your treaded path be blessed and full of wisdom. Assalamu alaikum.